All right, we're here. Hi, Crystal.
Hi Josh, how's it going?
Doing well, doing well. Let me know if you have any, if the audio sounds weird, if
Okay.
I take a sip of my Jiu-Jitsu Company cup of coffee,
Ooh.
or if I take a sip of my water from my
Ooh.
Jiu-Jitsu Company brand. I'm just doing gratuitous marketing
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, and you have the nice, lovely background with all of the merchandise too, and the lovely wallpaper.
Exactly,
Yes.
Jiu-Jitsu Company brand wallpaper. This is the Angie will definitely do that at some point.
Yes.
So how are you today?
I'm doing great. Missing the mats, but it is what it is.
Okay,
So, got 3 weeks down as of today. I've got 9 more weeks to go before, probably going to step on the mat at some point to start testing things out.
cool. It'll go by so quick. You won't even realize it.
Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself. But in the moment, I'm starting to get like antsy now.
Yeah.
Like,
Are you doing any like anything that like helps scratches that itch a little bit, like solo drills or like any kind of like video study stuff or just like talking to people about jujitsu or
Um, a little bit of both. So I did do a film. I looked at. I did a film study on myself, and sent it to one of my three coaches, Will Starks, this past week, where he made me look at one of the matches from the this year's Arnold competition, a match from the January competition, which was my very first jiu-jitsu competition, and then any old video from any year prior to that. So I think I picked a kind of a session with Mike and I from 2022.
oh cool.
Um,
Old
it,
times.
yes, very old times when, prior to like just starting out, barely a year in, and it was definitely good to kind of space the videos out because you really forget how much you've picked up
Yeah.
until you painfully go back and look at all the things that you know how you used to be. Like things have definitely gotten better since then. So I did that. Just trying to support everybody else who are doing their thing and competing. I may go to watch some jujitsu next month when I'm feeling better. It's a little hard because I have a full body compression suit on underneath. So it's hard to do any like solo drills right now. I think once I get cleared to start lifting, I think, which is in about 3 to 5 weeks, I might start, doing more, solo drills. But right now I'm still under restriction to just casually walk, not get my heart rate up,
Gotcha.
so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing right now. So I watch some film and kind of walk in place in my living room is
Okay.
about the extent of what I've been doing.
Which is so I was listening to your interview with Jiu-Jitsu Lou, I
Yeah,
think, the other
yeah.
day, and you guys mentioned that you were into fast cars, and so I imagine walking slowly through your living room is a strong contrast to driving a car at 120 miles an hour.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. So, but it's all part of the process, and yeah, like you said, before we started recording, 12 weeks will be here before I even know it. And this
Yeah.
will be a small blip on the radar because I'm here for a long time. So, relatively speaking, it's just going to be a very short period of time that I'm down.
Okay. Well, let's do this. So,
Yeah.
let's do a quick introduction, just so people
Oh.
like are familiar with what you do. I should have said that first, but
Oh.
also then I want to pick one little point of something that you just said a second ago. So,
Okay.
Crystal, who are you?
Like, who am I? That's a great question. I'm a board certified family medicine, sports medicine physician. I trained in family medicine in the Philadelphia area, and I, take care of athletes. I take care of mainly.
Like, like that?
Yeah, yeah. An athletic population. I have a telemedicine private practice, but I also work on the RP YouTube channel as a production manager. So that's a lot of what I do day in and day out. And nowadays, the other projects is I'm really trying to take on a lot more writing and a lot more content creation. So just kind of putting information out there, particularly for the general population, and trying to get them really excited about their fitness journeys, because especially with these new medications that are coming out, or at least so it seems on social media, I think it's really important to talk about health, and how these drugs are just a tool in the toolbox. They're not a magic, solution to everything, but when you piece it together with, good exercise, good nutrition, like things really, people really start to see lasting results. So,
These are the GLP-1s.
yes.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is actually great because that's something that I did want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
And then that theme that you just mentioned about
Yeah.
them being a tool in the toolbox is something that's kind of uh, near and dear to my heart right now because I've been doing these like skill acquisition talks with different
Yeah.
people about like how to get good at different things, and
Yeah.
in that discussion space, there's a lot of talk about like you know a tool in a toolbox kind of approach. Like,
Yeah.
as a coach, I have this tool, this tool, and this tool, and I can apply
Yeah.
these at the right moment for the
Yeah.
specific athlete. And I think it's probably the same discussion with GLP-1 drugs. And, you have somebody who has a certain physical situation,
Yeah.
and maybe they're just one tool in the toolbox for a greater picture.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
very cool. So that one question that I wanted to pick,
Yeah.
that we talked a little bit about before the introduction. Um, So with your situation, so you've
Yeah.
been mostly for your jiu-jitsu career doing jiu-jitsu in more of like a private or semi-private setting with like periodically jumping into open mats and getting a chance
Yeah.
to roll with different people.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that you were watching film of yourself, from 2022, and then,
Yeah.
you're able to see your progress from you back then to you now, it's interesting because like when you're in a group setting, one of the challenges that people face is that it's very hard for them to see progress because all of their teammates are progressing at the same time
Yeah.
and maybe at different rates. Or,
Yeah.
some people will improve faster, and you'll maybe get beat in a certain position by this person on Monday, and then Tuesday you do better. So it's a little bit inconsistent. And it's
Yeah.
very difficult to tell how much you're progressing.
Yeah.
But in like a small private or semi-private setting, when you watch yourself grappling and you see yourself progressing, like what are you seeing?
Oh gosh. You know, the 2022, I think prior to, gosh, when did Will moved to Michigan last summer? I'm really bad with timelines. Last August, and we really started to take a very, kind of, I don't want to say not serious, but like a very just structured, a lot more structure to the program,
Okay.
and a lot more drilling. And so prior to that, it was sort of, I had a lot of other things going on. Like, we'll probably, you were, interested in touching upon the GLP-1s. I wasn't on a GLP-1 medication when I first started learning jujitsu when I moved out here to Michigan in 2021. And I had put on a significant amount of weight because during the COVID pandemic. Plus, I was finishing up my sports med fellowship, which was pretty tough, especially in the time of COVID. So I just physically didn't have the skills. I was not conditioned at all. So, for an example, I think Mike was trying to teach me a single leg, and I just awkwardly held his leg for what seemed to be like forever, over a minute, just trying to figure out what hand, like, how do I move my body, like using my body as like, a way to sort of, put somebody, kind of destabilize somebody, versus, me trying to strong arm, take the leg and kind of strong arm it to where I want it to go. So I was doing a lot of that. But
Yeah.
also, I just had no idea where to put my hands. Like, I just felt like this awkward creep, like, kind of like, where do I put my hands? Where does this go? I don't
Yeah.
know what I'm doing. And then I would just get really tired, like even just grabbing the leg and getting very tired. Toriando passing, like I would try to like put my foot down once, and then that would be it. I would be like just out of breath.
Yeah.
Like, so trying to kind of get my physical body ready to actually do the jujitsu was probably way harder than actually learn. Like, it was a huge impediment to me actually learning the skills because I just wasn't in shape.
Okay.
Um, and so, that was kind of the bigger, like, I feel like that was a huge problem, not problem, but like a thing that I had to kind of work on for a number of years as, like I got stronger. My cardio had sort of improved and I was able to sort of survive things. I remember when you were giving me a lot of the kind of I'm like blanking, like where you give me like 3 minutes of like positionals, some
Yeah.
positional sparring. 3 minutes would just wipe me out. I would, if I was trying to play, if I was like sitting down like in guard, and my opponent standing, like like my abs would start cramping up, like what is this?
Yeah.
Like, I'm giving up. So there's that. And then the biggest thing between January and March of this year was just I think I was really kind of thrown, and I think it became very apparent that I just hadn't trained with a lot of other white belts.
Hmm.
I was just so used to, one, I was very hyper fixated on getting the perfect arm drag to single leg. Two, I was also really just not. My arms were pretty burnt out, and I was also very fatigued because we were like, this was 4 matches back to back to back,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, this is a lot. Like, you can only prepare so much until you finally feel what competition is like, and yeah, there was just a lot of missed opportunities. I guess I just wasn't expecting the white belt kind of do-si-do around the mat where we just kind of
In competition.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was like not. I was expecting, because I had trained, like Will and Mike and Delia all give, they're all brown and black belts who are very skilled, and like I was sort of expecting that, and so when
Yeah.
I didn't get that, I was just really like scratching my head, and I had a lot of wasted energy, and so
Oh, that's
one,
interesting.
well, yeah, trying to figure out one, like when the arm drag to single doesn't work, like what are my other options, and getting good at making sure that like like the kind of pop-up double and the arm drag to single like aren't my only two options. I can do a body lock,
Yeah.
we can hug it out and kind of go from there.
Well, it's interesting because it's that thing that you pointed out about the white belt kind of do-si-do, like circling around thing is, we do a lot of simulation matches when
Yeah.
I prepare people for tournaments and when we prepare ourselves for tournaments. And I think sometimes it's like, for example, if you're partnered up with somebody regularly who's a more experienced person,
Yeah.
you are working with a brown belt or a black belt, they're not going to do the do-si-do.
No, they're
And
not.
that's a very different, that's a very specific thing that happens a lot in white belt matches that
Yeah.
I think is worthwhile preparing for. And so maybe, one thing to consider, at least for me, is when I prepare white belts for tournaments, maybe I should factor in more like, okay, the white belt do-si-do is going to happen. Here's what it looks like. Let's
Yeah.
simulate that a little bit, just so it's not new to you when you're in the event.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And it yeah, it just I think you're totally on point with that. I just it really threw me off more than I wanted to admit, and I think that's what made the whole experience just very at least disappointing in my mind. You have to get through it. You have to experience it at some point and kind of
Yeah.
move on. But it was sort of like, man, I did all this preparation and like that was the one thing, like, the one like thing that kind of threw me off versus when I jumped into the absolute, it was sort of felt like, okay, this person's more skilled than me, they have a game. Like I felt like that loss was just like, okay, yeah, I can justify that, like this person was better than me, versus the
Yeah.
white belt match of like, man, we just went in a circle for like 5 minutes and the ref like made fun of us. And I could just feel everybody else sort of, yeah, the ref was like, hurry up, somebody make a move. And I'm like, we're trying, I'm trying, I promise.
It's so interesting though, because that's a huge difference. Like, that's one of those things where like, there's jujitsu itself, right? There's like the positions that we play and the techniques and then you compete. And then there's these a complete separate set of factors where like, the referee is making fun of you and people are like, come on, just do something like, and you're both circling around and like, and that's a real thing, right?
Yeah.
And it, you maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe
Yeah.
you get stressed out when you're in the moment, seeing like
Oh,
the
yeah.
referee heckling you a little bit
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and then your blood pressure goes up a little bit and then you start to get real tired because you're stressed out way more than you
Yeah.
normally are in training. And yeah, that's real stuff and it has a huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. The Arnold was fun because it started like it felt like jujitsu is finally starting to happen.
Mm.
Like, oh, I can. Here's a leg. Oh, like it's not like this is for whatever reason. Sometime between January and March, like the leg seems so far away. And March, it was like, oh, the leg's right here. I can just grab it. I just
Yeah.
grab it. Oh, okay. And I can use my body to just kind of, keep it moving. Oh, I got to move to the side because, if you just go in a straight line, they can, kind of, they can kind of adjust their balance. But if you kind of tilt to the one side or the other, you
Yeah, they
can,
fall down.
yeah.
That's awesome. This is great. I love hearing this kind of stuff because it's like I mean, it reminds me of when I first started competing,
Yeah.
which is nice, but then also, again, it's just this kind of stuff is so valuable because I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 21 years, so it's been a while since I've
Yeah.
experienced that. And I have new students coming in all the time
Yeah.
that have these experiences and it's good for me to kind of reconnect with that and hear your perspective of what that's like. So like with that kind of stuff, do you feel like so you mentioned that you were using GLP-1s?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that was a factor in your jiu-jitsu at all? Like do they have any like maybe side effects of like
Oh,
fatigue or higher anxiety or anything that might affect performance?
yes,
Okay.
definitely yes. The side effects, one of the most common side effects, particularly with semaglutide, also known as Wegovy or Ozempic, which was kind of the first sort of very popular. It wasn't the first, actually, by any stretch of the imagination, but it was the very first weight loss drug in that class that became very popular. Particularly because the weight loss effects were so huge. And I'd like to think that there's some, social media was, kind of, it was, kind of came out in 2017. Social media is around. 2014, social media was sort of around, but not to the extent of like Twitter, TikTok, and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
biggest side effects are nausea. So, being very careful about kind of the meal timing becomes very important. I think it all becomes important regardless of the whether you're on the drug or not, but particularly for those who are on it, nausea is a big thing. So making sure that I don't really eat anything, don't have a huge meal, 2 hours before training, just
Oh, okay.
because I've gotten into situations where I tried to shovel down some, French toast, maybe about half an hour, like an hour before training, and just remembering, like, oh God, like, please don't let me vomit on my training partners.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. And then also being mindful of, because I was trying to lose weight while trying to do jujitsu, you have to be very strategic about it. Um, there were times because the GLP-1s help manage your hunger signaling. They don't manage your fatigue. They don't manage other things that people experience when they have high levels of diet fatigue. Really poor sleep, like waking up and feeling like your heart's racing, that high cortisol, like adrenaline drive. Kind of crappy performance because you are trying to perform on lower calories. And so you really have to give that a think about that real hard and figure out where, what your priorities are going to be. Because I do remember trying to diet down last summer or 2 summers ago. And towards the end of that kind of diet phase, I remember rolling with Delia, and I just remember getting into mount and sort of just like spacing off, like, what do I do next? Where do we go from here? And she was just kind of looked at me like, what are you doing? Like, you're mount, like,
Yeah, submit
hello.
me. Yeah,
Yeah, just like get to it. Like, let's get to it. And so, yeah, like my reaction time's a lot slower. So yeah, not smart to, try and dieting into a competition. I don't understand it. Maybe there's something like we'll have more advanced drugs in the future that can address that, but right now we just don't. So,
gotcha.
and trying to do more, trying to perform with less calories just doesn't seem like the math just isn't mathing to me, if so to speak.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because that thing that you just mentioned about kind of spacing out a little bit when you're on top of
Mm-hmm.
the mount, like that reminds me a little bit of the conversation you had with Jujitsu Wu, where one part that I found very, very insightful was what there was a moment where you were taking these drugs and you started to think about eating differently. Like you mentioned a situation where you were eating maybe a meal or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
you still had a couple bites left, and you're like, okay, I'm good, and whereas before maybe there was more of I got to finish this. Like,
Yeah.
a different perception of
Yeah.
the experience of eating.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because like for me, I get a lot of like anxiety and stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
I started taking sertraline a couple years ago. And that has given me sort of a similar feeling as what you described about food. For me, if I have some sort of thought that I'm like obsessing
Yeah.
about or something that upset me that I just keep on chewing in my head,
Yeah.
on sertraline, it's a different feeling where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll still have the same thought, but I don't have to
It's
chew it
like,
50 times.
right.
Like I can chew it 5 times and be like, all right, I'm done,
Yeah.
and I
Mm-hmm.
can still leave the 2 or 3 bites of that thought on my plate and not finish it. And so to me, that was so interesting hearing your perspective of the GLP-1s of like your thought process going through that. Did I describe that accurately?
I was about to say, you like that analogy and that comparison actually was really awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I
Hmm.
think that completely, that I think that's a really fair comparison. I have taken bupropion or Wellbutrin in the past, and I would almost kind of, and like that noise or that like, food, the hunger is not an 11 anymore. It's like at a 2 or a 3. That hedonistic drive to like finish your food because I'm starving, or this food is really tasty and amazing and like I want more of it.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, like, cool, we can enjoy this, and like I don't have to finish it, and like that's okay. It's a, I don't want to say like an antidepressant for food, but it really takes that like food noise edge off that just, unmedicated just becomes very difficult to, do all the right things, eat, the protein and the healthy meals. I can still gain weight on healthy meals if left unchecked. Like I've done it before. So,
Yeah, that analogy you used about noise is
mhm.
really, sorry, I got like a hiccup.
No, that's okay.
But or a burp or whatever. But the noise thing makes so much sense to me because it really does sound so similar. Where you have this like it's like when you're driving from one state to another and you have the radio on and there's all
Yeah,
that static in the background, and then all of a sudden the signal starts to come through and you can
yeah,
hear you know Creedence Clearwater or Boys to Men or whatever 90s
yeah,
R&B you had on the radio playing, and like the signal starts to come through and all
yeah,
the there might still be a little bit of crackling in the sound, but it's not
yeah.
nearly as like,
Right.
and it's just sort of you can hear the signal way clearer.
Yeah,
And yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it's when I'm having those moments where I'm like anxious or I'm like obsessively chewing on something in my brain.
yeah,
um, it seems on sertraline, it seems like the signal is so much stronger where it's like, okay, I can see that I'm doing this,
Yeah.
I've already chewed it 5 times. I don't need to chew it 10 times. I'm just gonna like think about something else or ease off on this or be like,
Yeah.
ah, you know what, fuck it, doesn't matter, and
Yeah.
then move on. And so it's
Yeah.
such an interesting analogy and an interesting comparison. Um, do you feel like, so what you said about being on GLP-1s and
Yeah.
being on dieting and performance,
Yeah.
that same thing, do you feel without GLP-1s, that thing that, like the classic trope of like weight cutting for a jiu-jitsu tournament, do you feel, what are your thoughts on that kind of situation? Like, I know that's a super common thing in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I'll lose like maybe 3 or 4 pounds sometimes for a tournament, but I've never been a big weight cutter.
Yeah.
And so it's not something it's deeply in my realm of experience to do. But
Yeah.
for you, do you feel like, I don't know, I guess I'll leave it open-ended. What are your thoughts on that?
Thoughts on just like weight cutting in general,
Yeah,
or
just like,
using the medication to kind of help with
yeah, maybe
that?
sort of like weight cutting in general for, let's say, for the most common population that's listening to this podcast, like a recreational jiu-jitsu person that maybe competes once or twice a year, and is like, okay, I want to do this division, but I got to lose 13 pounds by, like June 14th to do it. Like, for you, what are your thoughts on that type of situation with GLP-1s, without GLP-1s?
Yeah. The current WADA guidelines has the GLP-1s on the monitoring list. So it's not a banned drug, but they are monitoring it for, potential performance enhancement, what's good for the sport, all of that stuff. To be fair, there are a bunch of other drugs that are all perpetually on the monitoring list. So it's not an outright banned drug. So I just wanted to throw, as of 2025. So just wanted to throw that out there. So it's technically not, you know, if you're competing in the IBJJF, which I think goes by WADA rules, or like, they have WADA testing.
I think
Um,
so.
so I guess in that sense,
Or is
the
it USADA or WADA?
USADA is like the United States, like WADA is like the world, like encompasses all the international stuff, and then USADA I think is,
That's what the W is for, right?
yeah, yeah. So
The
like,
world.
so it wouldn't necessarily. I guess I'm just trying to say it's not necessarily cheating in the sport if somebody were to use that like just in technical terms, right? Because the
Okay.
last thing I would want is for somebody to use a banned substance to kind of help, you know, help themselves to compete. As for how I feel about weight cuts in general, particularly for recreational athletes, not a huge fan, but also like it's an I'd have to. I think it's important to kind of dig into the why of why somebody really wants to compete at that, at a lower weight class. Is it because really, especially for women, there aren't, I know a lot of people do struggle with finding competitors in a particular weight class. Like even at the Arnold, I was just like kind of teeter tottering back and forth with like, is somebody going to sign up for my stuff? And like, I just paid $100 for this. Like, it would suck to have to like drop out. A lot of times, not necessarily for jujitsu, but I remember in powerlifting, weight cuts just kind of became an excuse to like just diet down to a certain number.
Right.
um, and so I think it's really important to kind of tease out somebody's why for wanting to do stuff. And I think there's also a limit to, depending the 13-pound kind of example of like, what is their starting weight? Because 13 pounds on somebody who is, 110-pound female versus, somebody who's like 260 male, kind of large. So like, where there's differences there. And then what is the weigh-in situation like? Is it, you get to weigh in the day before and get to rehydrate? So I think there's so many different factors that come into play that need to be answered before, kind of making that decision. But for a lot of recreational athletes, I'd probably lean more on the side of no. I've seen just too many kind of recreational athletes kind of end up doing really crappy and not doing as well as they could have, or if they had just kind of kept to like their usual routine and
Yeah.
not let this weight cut. Also another big thing is that they're so focused on this weight cut that like nothing else, they forget about all the other things, like making sure their game is tight, and the stress of the weight cut like just completely ruins the whole experience, and it overrides all of that.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know if that's
interesting.
what I don't know if that's what you see in jujitsu, because obviously like you have coached a lot of people and have a lot more experience with that. I just kind of, from what I can see from people I've competed against in powerlifting, and then kind of what I see every now and again on social media for jujitsu, kind of feel like that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense, and I mean, to me, it sounds kind of like, generally leaning away from it, but also it depends, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, kind of what I see is like I have seen people who, let's say it's a 213 pound male
Mm-hmm.
in their late 20s
Yeah.
who wants to use a competition and a certain weight class as like sort of an incentive to lose weight that they would have otherwise tried to lose.
Yeah.
So there's that person, and then
Yeah.
there's, I think more common that I see is people who are doing their first or second jiu-jitsu tournament, and they're kind of like somewhere close enough to another weight class, and they're
Yeah.
really anxious about competing against bigger people. So like somebody who might be 183-pound person who, the next weight class down might be like 174 pounds or something like that, or
Yeah.
170 pounds. And they're like, well, if I stay in this weight class, I'm going to compete against these giants that are like huge. And like from an outside perspective, I look at the people that they're competing against in that weight class, and they don't really look that big,
Yeah.
like from an outside
Yeah.
perspective, but then to them, because they're anxious about it, somebody who's like they all look like giants, like, oh, I'm going to be the tiny person in this giant division, I better cut down to the next weight class. But that weight cut is like a 10-pound weight cut. So
Right.
then they end up being stressed out, like you said about the weight cut. And it's almost like they're replacing the stress of going with people that they perceive as bigger with the stress of cutting weight for the tournament.
Yeah.
And so kind of the way I look at it is like, well, I'd rather not worry about food and, fall where I fall. If it's
Yeah.
like 5 pounds or something, for me, it's not that bad. But,
Yeah.
you know, but at the same time, I can understand being super anxious about going against bigger people. And I have seen the weight cut affect performance too, where they do all
Yeah.
this work to cut weight and then they compete, and then their performance is flat and they have no energy and they gas super hard because,
Yeah.
they're just not, it's not the right thing for them.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like you also have to think about, am I going to have enough time to rehydrate myself? Am I going to have enough time to, make sure that I have all the nutrients? But also, if I've actually been really dieting into this competition, you've had a prolonged period of low calories, which is going to give you no energy to do your thing. And also, the jujitsu is like really odd. Like if it was powerlifting, it'd probably like I would kind of mass moves mass more often than not. But you can get really slick in jujitsu. You can be faster. You can be more technical. Like there's all these other options other than just pure strength. Like
Yeah.
I do understand that's a thing, but man, if there's one thing that that 6 week period between January and the Arnold, that really in March, that you can get really slick with technique and put up a good fight and make yourself really annoying to people who are stronger than you, and people who are stronger than you. I just kind of felt like I encountered a lot of people who were sort of in a similar kind of boat, or just starting out with jujitsu, and are definitely much stronger than me, and kind of realizing that I can weasel my way out of like certain positions because they're really trying brute force strength to make this one move happen. But
Yeah.
like you see it coming from a mile away and you're like, oh, this is what they're trying to do. Let me get myself out of here, or let me throw up a knee shield. I remember one guy was like really impressed with the fact that I threw up a knee shield and it just blocked every, like whatever they were trying to do was like completely like gutted from that. I was just like, because I've gotten smashed so many times with like 50 million other times prior to that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put my knee up and we're just gonna hang out here.
And all
And
of a sudden they bounce off of your guard and they can't pass. Yeah.
or they just seem really defeated because like that's all they had, like the one move that that they had in their arsenal was just now shut down, and
Yeah.
they don't have other options. So
That's funny. That's a good point. Like where, really like they're, yeah, like the technique and being slick and having there being other factors in addition to strength and size and all this stuff where like, yeah, maybe the weight cutting is not like, it's not like MMA where like,
yeah,
we're doing an MMA event and there's going to be, like being heavier when somebody's fist is hitting your face really
yeah,
hard is a different thing than somebody sitting on top of you in half guard and being maybe 10 pounds heavier instead of the same weight as you.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Real interesting. And, that was interesting what you said about WADA with
Mm-hmm.
the GLP-1 drugs too.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something I thought a lot about, like with, I mean, it doesn't like the drug thing doesn't really affect me because 80 or IBJJF tournaments that I compete in, like there's no drug testing, and like I don't do any performance enhancing drugs. I
Yeah,
never have, and I don't take like TRT or anything like that.
yeah,
So it's not really something I think about.
yeah,
But people in but people do joke about masters divisions being like the
yeah,
TRT divisions,
yeah.
and I haven't really felt that effect from any of the people I've competed against.
That's good.
But like it's so it doesn't really show up on my radar, but I know it's a big thing in the world of jiu-jitsu in general,
Yeah.
PEDs and other things. And so you think about maybe a GLP-1 might have an effect on training,
Mm-hmm.
and performance or weight cutting.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I mean, I guess you could say the same of other things like, for example, the sertraline we were talking about,
Yeah.
like are people who have high anxiety, if they, would them taking some sort of anti-anxiety drug be a form of performance enhancing drug for them? And, you can kind of go down that rabbit hole, and
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about. It doesn't really matter, I guess, but it's kind of an interesting rabbit hole to think about. I hadn't considered that with the GLP-1s.
Yeah, no, I always, especially as a sports med doctor, and somebody who's taking care of like Team USA athletes and collegiate athletes. Drug testing is definitely a thing. I've had to sit in and be the chaperone for that, and so yeah, you definitely there are websites where you can go and just make sure that people, there's committees for this. So sertraline is I'm fairly certain sertraline's safe from those rules, but like you can always and I can always send the link where you just literally type in your medication, type in your sport, and then it'll show you like is it banned in competition, is it banned at all times, or is it just like you can have at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually would like to take a look at that. I
Yeah,
mean, again, it doesn't really affect me personally, but it's still just interesting to read about.
yeah.
Um, Dang, I had a thought about something that kind of piqued my interest about that. Um, oh, yeah, I forget. It passed my
Okay.
mind. But so I think like, do you, do you feel like, going back to the GLP-1s,
Yeah,
like oh, that's what the thought is.
yeah,
So I have seen online that celebrities will sometimes use GLP-1s to like for weight loss purposes, to like um, more for aesthetic, like
yeah,
if they're trying to lose weight for a certain role in a movie or something like
yeah.
that. And so that kind of reminds me of using them in a sport context as well to
Right.
like maybe lose weight. And I obviously these are like ways of abusing a certain drug for a performance in whether it's a movie or a jiu-jitsu context or an MMA thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's kind of a shame because it seems like when I read stuff like that, it almost helps give GLP-1s more of a bad rap.
Yeah.
And I think, like you mentioned in the beginning, they're just tools in a toolbox, and they can be very helpful for people
Yeah.
who are trying to lead more healthy and productive and
Right.
enjoyable lives. And it's kind of a shame to see stuff like that because it really does kind of like put some stink on it.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think that's part of, celebrities using it, to kind of, drop very quick weight for a role. But also, trying to get, advice or opinions from, celebrities or actors and actresses. I don't work with them. So I also don't know what their medical history is. Like they could also be struggling with stuff like I'm not, so I think, the kind of argument to that is, until you actually have a full medical history on that person, I think it's really hard to judge
Right.
in that respect. And then you are right in that the whole aesthetics or performance part gets really, it's a gray area because, yes, at one point, being 4'11" and 190 pounds, yes, I had sleep issue. I had like snoring issues. Yes, I had, chronic joint pain. But, yes, there was some part of me that did want to look different. So am I wrong for having that? Or, like, I felt like for a very long time I had to like remind people that there was all these actual, tangible things like the bad sleep, snoring, and all of that stuff. But, I felt a little dishonest by not saying out loud that there was a part of me that wanted to look different and wanted to perform different. And
Mhm.
so I don't know if necessarily if I could have teased that out. Like, I don't think, I just am not an athletic person at that size. Like, I wish I could be. If I totally would rock it and just crush everybody in the absolute or super heavy division if I could. Like,
I hope I didn't come across as like judgmental about that. Like
no,
it was more
no.
just like I was sort of clumsily fumbling my way through a question slash thought. It like
Yeah.
more like I was just sort of saying that it's unfortunate that there are things that put stink on something that is ultimately like a tool that can be very
Yeah.
productively used to help people.
Yeah, no, for
Um,
sure. And a lot of people have feelings about that too. And I guess, I'm like, when I encounter people who have a lot of feelings about other people in the world, about, they have very strong, a lot of people have very strong feelings about, somebody using this. And it's just, I try and keep the focus back to like, what is going on in your life? Like, what are you doing today to kind of like, bring to the, like, I don't know if this is like my namaste kind of, era where it's like, just like if I had to worry about what everybody else is doing and complain about what everybody else is doing, I would be exhausted.
yeah,
uh, you know, and so that's just not, that might have served me in my 20s, that might have served me in my 30s, but man, I'm about to be 43 in a couple days and it's just, I'm tired as shit.
happy
I
early
want
birthday.
Thank you. I
Mhm.
want to preserve my energy to make sure that people understand that it is a tool in the toolbox and, promote the, how it can be used in, in conjunction with, you know, uh, resistance training on a regular basis, eating your fruits and vegetables, eating lean proteins, like all of that good stuff.
It's interesting because that point that you said about um, you know, part of you being concerned with like aesthetics and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really it brings up such a good idea that like people are complicated. And it's not like people just have one reason for doing things and it's not just that like that, whatever that reason is either a good reason or a bad
Yeah.
reason. Like there's all these shades of gray to everything and people are complicated and I think that kind of reminds me of a discussion I was having with my friend Jacob yesterday, where he was talking to me about like in a jiu-jitsu school,
Yeah.
there are people who are like diehards that are just gonna, they're training 18 times a day, and they're
Yeah.
like they want to get better.
Yeah.
And then there's people that come in and they're in it for the social part of it and the
Yeah.
fun. Maybe some people just want to get a workout and then go back to work or whatever.
Yeah.
And we were discussing like the people who are just in it for the social part of it, they like coming in, they like shooting the
Mm-hmm.
shit with their friends.
Yeah.
How do we view them? Because when I talk to Jacob, we talk a lot about like you know coaching and skill development and how to
Yeah.
get people good at jiu-jitsu. And from my perspective, those people are fantastic because like who am I to judge why they come into a jiu-jitsu
Yeah.
school? I'm just happy that they're here. But
Yeah.
also like make the culture of the school better.
Yeah.
They go out like and go to parties with the other people from the
Hmm.
school, and they come in and they light up the room when they are
Yeah.
joking around with their friends. And so there's like, it's when you own a jiu-jitsu school, it's not just like how do I get people good at this sport.
Right.
It's you're creating this like culture and a community, and everybody, and there's all these shades of gray of like motivations and things that people enjoy about the school, sort of like what you were saying about
Yeah.
shades of gray of like, you know what's important to me. Is it better aesthetics, or is it that I want to lose weight for this reason, or is it this
Yeah.
my joints hurt? And it's so hard. Like you kind of want to like it's natural, I think, to be a little bit like, okay, well, like we're a jiu-jitsu school, we want people to get good at jiu-jitsu, and then maybe not value the people who are just in it for the fun culture part of it as much.
Yeah.
But that's a silly thing because they're
Yeah.
just as important in the school as anybody else.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, but that's just
No.
like I appreciated your point about there being shades of gray
Yeah.
in, and you can't really pick those shades of gray apart in why people make decisions about like GLP-1s, or
Yeah.
about why they make certain lifestyle choices, whether it's for aesthetics or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. You actually brought up a really fantastic point about culture, and I completely agree in that not everybody, everybody's there to, everybody plays a role in shaping the culture of the gym, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody's, is equally important. So not every role has to be like, we're gonna cut throat, try and win at practice today. In fact, I think that's, probably one of the most unproductive ways to do jujitsu. Like if you're in it for the long haul. So
Yeah,
there are people, yeah, just every role is sort of like it is what it is. I've had conversations with people as we're rolling, and then sometimes it's like, okay, well, I have a competition coming up, so it's time to get down to business. Like there's, but every like, yeah, every person, every role is like a different experience, and you just gotta embrace it for what it is.
yeah,
So
yeah. And people are complicated because maybe
yeah,
like on Monday you might come in with some spiciness on you, and you want to get some hard rolls in.
yeah,
And then Wednesday, you might have,
like
like watched like a comedy special or something before jiu-jitsu, and you're in like a lighthearted mood, and you just want to have some goofy rolls with your buddies.
yeah, yeah,
And it's jiu-jitsu's, I guess nothing, whether it's jiu-jitsu or any other activity, is never like the same thing all the time.
yeah,
Which is what's cool about all this stuff, is that it's so like um, amorphous. Like you
yeah.
can there's always some new shape to it.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Crystal, how you doing for time? I want to be respectful of your time and like not keep you forever. And I know we had like 20 minutes of me messing around with the Wi-Fi before
Oh,
we got on. Are you still good?
I'm still good.
Okay.
I'm still good for another 20. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Um, so some of the other stuff I wanted to talk about is
Yeah.
maybe related, but
Yeah.
science literacy,
Oh
right?
boy.
So one of the things that, so since we're talking
Yeah.
about things like, nutrition,
Mhm.
GLP-1s, we
Mhm.
talked a little bit about like, coaching and skill
Yeah.
development, all that kind of stuff. And these are all like topics that touch on science,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when I did the other talks with like, Mike, Greg, Cal, all these guys, we talked about like skill acquisition stuff,
Yeah.
right? And when
Yeah.
I talk to people about all this stuff, science always comes up.
Yeah.
And I'm in this situation where I'm a coach. I've been
Yeah.
coaching jiu-jitsu for a couple decades, but I'm not a scientifically literate person. I don't have an academic background in any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I can read a bunch of books and I can
Right.
try to understand studies and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
there's a hard wall that I hit as far as educational background.
Yeah.
And I suspect it's probably the same thing in nutrition and in some of the
Mhm.
other areas. So for people who are kind of like either like kind of like me in
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu, or me in nutrition, or me in whatever, that hit that academic wall,
Yeah.
what are some of the, like, if I was going to talk to you about nutrition and I say to you, okay, well, this doctor guy says that eating the shells of turtles ground
Jeez.
into a powder will help me, lose 80 pounds in 9 minutes. and this other person says, eating chicken skin is really good for my cholesterol, and this other person says I should just eat lean meats and vegetables, and they all say they have evidence, and they all say that there's studies that support this and that. How do the non-scientific literate people parse, like, who knows what they're talking about, what actual science says about stuff? Who do we listen to?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I think, um, one thing to point out is a lot of the kind of experts seem to be really good at like one topic, which is great. Like all the researchers, like the PhD people who are like science, it's like, yeah, you spent your whole freaking life talking, researching for the most part, like this one thing, like nutrition, like this one mechanism of nutrition. So, even I have a hard time kind of keeping up with stuff because before Chat GPT kind of entered the realm, I used to go on these PubMed K-holes where I would read a paper, but then I would look at the references section because, I'd read a sentence and then like it would, reference some other study, and then I would get sidetracked and then I would look at this other study. And then before I knew it, like 10, papers later, I was like, what was I even trying to look up again? So
Yeah.
I find it very hard for me to organize my brain and kind of look at that. I think that AI is definitely a huge tool, a huge benefit to all of that. And I think asking those questions, and it's getting more advanced where it can actually just summarize a lot of the literature. Like it'll give you a summary, but it'll also give you the literature. So now I can just read those at least as a place to start and not get sidetracked of like, oh, I gotta look at this paper and I gotta look at that paper and I gotta look at that. So
That's my tabs on my
yeah,
phone right now, is like 40
yeah,
different papers about all kinds of different shit. Yeah.
yeah. I find that consistently, my husband does a very, and everybody at RP does a very good job of organizing the nutrition, in such a way that is not just backed in science, but just very practical,
Hmm.
so to speak. And I think one thing that the medical community, my own colleagues, tend to really miss the boat on is that calories do matter. For better or for worse, it doesn't make it good or bad, but it does matter at the end of the day. And that is when you think about gaining weight and losing weight. And yes, there's definite nuances to that. As far as our hormones that come into play, our, temperature regulation, our metabolism. But at the end of the day, like the calories that we put in our mouths are going to matter. And so, I think they do a very good job of that. And I'm not just saying that because, I am biased because I do work for them. But I really found, before I had, like, right around the time that I had met Mike, almost 12 years ago, 11 years ago, I actually bought their first book and read through it, and on my own without talking to him about it. And just I really found it to be very straightforward and honest.
Yeah.
And even though the GLP-1 stuff, the hunger stuff, was like always a constant struggle, the principles of like healthy eating for sport performance, I have taken those principles, for the last decade. And so it really set me up for success for, come time for, once the GLP-1 kind of agonist rolled around and I decided to, bite the bullet and give it a shot.
I gotcha. Yeah. It's, because it's interesting with all this stuff where there's like, you know, like I've been following you and Mike and RP for a long time also.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I really like about the overall message that is put out is that there's sort of this consistent message of um, trusting science, but not blindly,
Yeah.
and that there's hierarchies of evidence, and there's ways of sorting through this stuff, and there's also value put on people's own lived experiences.
Yeah.
And like, so for example, talking to you and Mike, like obviously, I mean, I graduated high school, I've got like one semester of college and that's it, but I've never felt like, in discussing coaching and any of the stuff with you guys who are way more qualified to talk about this stuff than I am,
Oh
that you disrespect my experience at all.
my God.
And so, which is great because,
My
for
God.
me, it's nice because you could easily be like, hey, listen, we're doctors. We know about, exercise science and sports science, like, pipe down, Vogel.
Oh,
Um,
Jesus.
no, but
No, I.
that happens in these skill acquisition talks all the time.
Good
Like I get
God.
bombed in my DMs all the time by people that are like, that have like 2 years coaching experience in jiu-jitsu that are like, well, listen, you really want to do things this way, blah, 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 blah. And like, and so it's, I imagine it's probably similar in other fields too, with like, maybe nutrition or other sports or whatever, where there's like, the experience of people who have a long time practically coaching on the floor.
Yeah.
And then there's also, you know, scientifically literate people who have a great understanding in theory, how science works and
Yeah.
what the science says about certain things. And then there's sort of people that straddle those two worlds. And, you know, I think maybe whatever the Venn diagram of all three of those
Mm-hmm.
people, meets somewhere, and that's a valuable space.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that it's, maybe sometimes there's not good communication and understanding, like where, some coaches might be like, hey, listen, yeah, I know the science guys, they have all the theory, but I've been doing this for 20 years. What do they know?
Yeah.
And then, so I think you kind of get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting, the message that you guys send, because it seems to straddle that center point of the Venn diagram where there's like, you guys have experience in these fields. You're a jiu-jitsu practitioner.
Yeah.
You've done other sports. Mike has too,
Yeah.
but you're both very involved in, nutrition and sports science and all these things in an academic sense as well. And so I feel like a lot of what I read from you guys comes from a place of being very like thoughtful and fair-minded,
Yeah.
um, with this stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. There is definitely, um, yeah, that's wild that I mean, I'm not surprised that your DMs are like that.
They're nuts. Ever since I did those podcasts with that
Oh,
this
yeah.
podcast, ever since we started it, constant DMs. It's nuts.
Just if those are in your requests folder, I would just stop reading the request. Like, just some
I mean, some of the
people,
people they're super cool. Some people, and
yeah,
other people are kind of
just
nutty
like
with it.
it's insane. Yes, I agree. Especially for somebody, for family medicine, pass your residency program, you have to see 1,650 patient outpatient like clinic patients in clinic over like a 3-year period. And so, yeah, getting like it's the same thing with jujitsu, like encounters, like how are you doing today? How can I help you today? And everybody's got a different problem, everybody's got a different scenario, and you have to figure out how to navigate through it. I think that information is that practical information and experience is so important. I would say, you know, I would say just as equally important as just kind of knowing what the literature says, because there is that art and science. Medicine is both art and science. Like, we can't just like, if we had to do everything by this algorithm and by the book, like nothing ever happens, in like a perfect linear fashion like they
Yeah,
have it in the books. So you have to kind of develop that kind of, you have to develop rapport. You have to just, use your, the information that you're getting from, the patient in front of you to kind of make those clinical decisions. So yeah, you've been teaching for how many years? You started a successful business, and it just seems to be getting better and better. You guys like
thank you.
I understand where you're coming from, but I was like, damn, I can't. It would just. It's a very silly thing. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know. Like you more you
Yeah,
realize you don't know, and so it sounds like you're just getting people at like that part of the curve that think they know everything and they really don't know shit.
yeah. It's funny because there's like, it's that noise in the signal thing you and I were talking about, where
Yeah.
like I'm finding that there's a lot of like really confident voices, and I find myself more and more attracted to the question marks.
Yeah.
Like I listen to a podcast, and maybe the person in the podcast is discussing this stuff, and they're speaking about it as if like, okay, well, it kind of depends. Like, there's uncertainty here.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence says this, but the evidence isn't that strong, and blah
Right.
blah 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 blah. And I'm finding myself more and more drawn to like the maybe the uncertain voices that have some wiggle room for interpretation than the ones
Yeah.
that just have the clearest signal that are like, no, this is it, you know?
I feel like if you are reading a study and it's like, no, this is it, and I wonder if those people have enough practical experience, or they might have forgotten what it was like to be a coach, a nutrition coach, a physician, a healthcare provider, and just that's my biggest thing. Is just like how many people have you actually coached? Do you have a successful practice? How many patients do you see? Do you still see patients?
Yeah.
So I think there's always, yeah, I'm always just less, I think that was also the hardest thing for me when starting to write content is, um, you know, there is so much gray area and there's so much nuance that I'm like, ooh, can I really make a firm decision on like, this is what you got to do? And so trying to find that balance was difficult at first, to
Yeah.
so to speak, but it gets better with practice.
It's interesting because like I imagine it's probably the same thing in medicine where like there are very, very smart people studying a lot of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's it seems very rare that they completely agree on a lot of things. Like
Mm-hmm.
in I know that's sort of a general idea, but like if there's a bunch of smart people studying something like skill acquisition, for example,
Yeah.
and these really smart people that spend their lives studying this stuff don't really agree, then
Yeah.
maybe there's some question marks there,
Yes.
right? Maybe there's uncertainty.
Yes.
And so maybe it's the same, I would imagine it's probably the same thing in medicine where there's people that are, studying, I don't know, let's say GLP-1s, right? The
Yeah.
effects of GLP-1s long term on, this population, 30 to 40-year-old people who are blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And there's not like a complete consensus on this specific effect, then there's a question mark there, right?
Yeah.
And then the way that filters down to how somebody, like, maybe a doctor would prescribe something like that, okay, this is what seems to be going on here.
Yeah.
There's some wiggle room, might have these side effects. It might be good for you. Let's try it,
Yeah.
see what effects it has on you, and then we'll monitor you from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's usually kind of the basis of how most of my conversations go. Unless, for a lot of people who are relatively healthy, like talking about the pros and cons, having that nuanced discussion, and like, just having, let's make a decision. And if the decision is wait until you think about it, then that's also fine too. So,
Yeah. I think, we still have a couple minutes left. So
yeah.
if you don't mind if I kind of tease out like one little more string of
Yeah.
this topic.
Totally.
So then, you get into like scientific studies
Yeah.
and the literature, right?
Yeah.
And I mentioned that like kind of educational wall that I hit earlier.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that wall becomes really pronounced in not knowing how to, like, I can read a study because the
Yeah.
words are written in a language that I understand,
Right.
but there's jargon that I don't get. But like I speak
Right.
English, they're written in
Right.
English, right? But then I don't really have a way of telling, okay, is this study well done? Is this something that is a strong study? Is this a part of a larger consensus of things that are all kind of pointing in the same direction? I
Yeah.
think maybe that's some of the scientific literacy that I was talking about, where
Yeah.
it's hard for people in my shoes to know, like, when another jiu-jitsu instructor says to me, well, the research says this. And
Right.
then you're like, okay, well, how good is the research? Does it all say that? Is there research that says something totally different?
Right.
Um, you know, do you have any sort of general guidelines that can kind of like maybe focus and clarify that kind of topic?
Yeah. So I think it's also hard because the times that I've actually looked up, and I'm actually just completely unfamiliar. I saw bits and pieces of that debate with talk, and I'm not very familiar with the skill acquisition. The biggest, everybody says the randomized control trials are the, kind of like the bread and butter of studies where you have a group that has, the treatment, or one group, the placebo group, that has no treatment, and you have the other group that has whatever it is that you're trying to treat, and then you compare, this outcome, and does the outcome happen or does it not? That seems to be like the gold standard for stuff. And then sort of meta-analyses takes, all the different studies available on that topic and tries to analyze using fancy math to see what, overall what the kind of consensus is, like comparing all of those different studies. So I guess if you are looking at kind of literature, the hierarchy would be, looking at a meta-analysis and kind of
Okay.
looking at those conclusions. I think the math is just, it's just really fancy math that's just beyond the scope of this. But then the other thing that I also wonder is, is the study, like the people that are used in these studies, applicable to your population that you're interested in, right? Like, I don't know what your gym's population is, right? Like, is it like somewhere between 20-year-olds to 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds to 50-year-olds? Are they, what ethnicity are they? What, and are the, when you're talking about literature, like the studies, like, are these actually looking at jujitsu, acquiring jujitsu skills, or are these just like generalized, like what kind of skills are they looking at? So those are also like taking things with a grain of salt, and like, you have to be very careful about, the literature says this, well, this, stuff has been, they researched this topic on people with type 2 diabetes who, had a heart attack, who also had high blood pressure, they also smoked. And then, with these conclusions, like, it's, for an athletic population, I think it would be very difficult. Like, we have to be very careful about translating the findings of that study over to, your gym population, so to speak, and be like, this is what it says and this is what we need to do. Well, not necessarily.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that reminds me of the weight cutting thing we were talking about, where that like I'm 45, I'll be 46 in August, and if I put on about 10 extra pounds during Christmas, and
Yeah.
which puts me in a different weight class now, and
Yeah.
the idea of a 45-year-old cutting weight is different, especially with my training schedule, which is a very, very high training schedule.
Yeah.
And I feel like, okay, well, is my situation completely different than maybe a 23-year-old cutting weight who is maybe 130 pounds and they have to lose 10 pounds? Or, and so I think it's those shades of gray that we keep coming back to, which sort of seems like the underlying theme of this, most of this
Right.
discussion today.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, I think, I think your approach is really good in that, yes, we can take it, like, that's a good point to consider, but also, with your experience as a coach, like, you can, have some confidence to maybe give it a shot if you find that it's, reasonable, like whatever they said in the literature is reasonable.
Mhm.
But I don't think you necessarily have to take it as like, I have to do this because, XYZ study said so. So
Yeah.
because, you all also, the coaching experience and working with athletes directly, has a huge impact, like, also needs to be taken into consideration. That individuality, needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, how I feel about it, like with jiu-jitsu coaching, is like I trust my experience, and a good, I think I have a good base in being very self-critical and double checking myself to make sure that I'm
Yeah.
not like, too biased in this direction or seeing things through a lens that might not be accurate.
Yeah.
And, not perfect, but I think I have a lot of faith in my experience. And so when I, read a study or I see some sort of scientific research or something that, sort of pushes me in a certain direction, I think I feel comfortable letting that, like experimenting with it a little bit, seeing what kind of
Yeah.
results I get, maybe running like a light-hearted experiment with it
Yeah.
and seeing if it meshes with my experience or if it
Yeah.
explains something that I've experienced in teaching, coaching, and my own practice.
Yeah, and then I think the other under kind of appreciated, underrated point to consider too is like, especially for you who owns a gym, you have operational, management stuff to consider, right? You have instructors, you have who are, being taught a curriculum to teach the curriculum to students. Like, how would
Yeah.
that, like, a lot of people have a lot of great ideas, and then it's the execution part that seems to like how are you going to execute that in day-to-day operations? And maybe that's just my project management, family medicine. I feel like a project manager for somebody's overall care, so to speak. And like
Mhm.
getting things to the finish line, getting a project done, taking an idea through the steps of planning and executing, and then figuring out like, did this work or did this not work? Like, are we going to continue with it? All of that just gets very, people like kind of scratch their heads, and that's where people seem to fall apart a lot more times than not.
That's such a good point because I mean, I've talked about this with a couple other jiu-jitsu instructors where, their perspective is that, for example, like skill development in a jiu-jitsu school is the biggest thing you got to think about. And I don't find that to be the case. I find that
Mm-hmm.
it's like an important thing. We're
Yeah.
called the jiu-jitsu company, so we should probably teach people something about jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
But but also there's culture building. Not everybody's
Mm-hmm.
in it to get great at jiu-jitsu. Some
Yeah.
people, they enjoy just coming in and shooting the shit with their friends. Some people want to break a sweat. Some people want to
Yeah.
do it for 2 years and then quit and then go start rock climbing or something
Yeah.
else. And so like you said, as a business owner, there's like the programs that we have,
Yeah.
and there's the training floor, and there's the culture of the school,
Mm-hmm.
there's the merch,
Yeah.
there's all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there's all these lenses that you look at stuff. Like when I'm teaching a class, I look at it through my teacher's eyes, and then I put on my
Mm-hmm.
business owner's hat when I'm, ordering toilet paper or like, changing, the like, okay, this towel is, it needs to be changed, whatever.
Yeah.
And there's all these different lenses, and sometimes those lenses don't really, those things don't always mesh with each other. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to find a way to make all those things work together in one space. And I imagine same with a medical practice where,
Yeah.
you have a doctor that's talking to a patient, and that's different than somebody who owns the medical practice who has to
Yep.
think about ordering the toilet paper, making
Mm-hmm.
sure the bathrooms are clean,
Yep.
making sure when the patient walks into an office or has an online interview that
Yeah.
they're in a space where they feel comfortable.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure. It's a very underrated, set of things to consider. That's why I'm always, every time I come to the jiu-jitsu company, I'm always like just ecstatic about like, ooh, like, look at the artwork on the wall and all these like little, ooh, there's a plant here. Or like, I love how Angie redecorated this place, like, for the umpteenth time. And then there's like, the light, the like lighting, right next to where the timer is. Like, you guys have the sign and like, all that aesthetic stuff. I get really just even more excited to train, at the space. But like, I notice those things. Like, I notice those little things
I love
and
it
get
though.
really pumped about it.
See, I'm so happy that you said that because, we just had that interview with, we talked to Mark Vetri the other day,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
we were talking about hospitality in the
mm-hmm,
restaurant and jiu-jitsu industries. And that's like, that's a big thing. Like it's 3:28 p.m. right now, and at 5 p.m. I'm going to put some music on because there's going to be students walking in the door for
mm-hmm.
6 p.m. class at 5:30.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put some sort of like light, music that is like pleasant to listen to when they walk in the room.
Yeah.
I'll turn the fans on so the air feels good and it's
Yeah.
circulating. Like, yeah, and all that little stuff matters. There's cat pictures on the walls which make me smile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a nice, happy place. It's a great place to train. It really is.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Well, you're hired.
I'm good at cleaning floors. I can totally do that. Can scrub some toilets.
Sold. That's I got to do that a little bit later on today. So, all right, Crystal. Well, I think it seems like this is like a natural winding down point. I
Yeah.
feel like I've taken enough of your time. You've been
Oh,
very generous.
oh, thank you so much for
Um,
having me on to
of course.
babble about anything and everything and sharing the white belt experience. Being in my 40s, I'm a white belt. It was hard at first. It still is hard, but it's a lot of fun and totally worth the journey. So for anybody out there who's listening, who's like, man, I could use a new sport, try jujitsu.
I love it. Yeah, people need to hear this stuff.
Yeah.
So awesome. All right, Crystal. Well, is there any? Are there any places where people should look for you online?
Most often, I seem to be, trying to post more content stuff on Instagram, Dr. Christle, Christle. And other than that, I've got some free stuff coming out, some content stuff in the works. Got a couple articles on the RP website, but yeah, look for more content in the future, particularly about GLP-1s.
Very cool. All right. So I will stop the podcast and then just talk for a couple minutes afterwards. And
Okay,
cool.
cool.